The mansion stood as a monument to power and wealth, surrounded by ornate iron gates and discreetly placed guards to ensure nothing disturbed the tranquility of the billionaire and his family. It was a colossal structure, with marble columns imported from Italy and floor-to-ceiling windows revealing silk curtains that swayed gently with the central air conditioning. Outside, symmetrical gardens displayed rare flowers brought from every continent, and an imposing fountain sent jets of crystal-clear water into the sky, as if even the water had learned to obey the grandeur of the place. But despite all the architectural beauty and impeccable appearance, there was a detail invisible to any casual visitor. The atmosphere was cold, heavy, marked by an almost suffocating silence. That space was too perfect, too organized, too clean. It was the kind of perfection born not of life, but of obligation, of mechanical routine, of the effort of hands that never appear in family photographs. Those hands belonged to the maid. She appeared every day before the sun even rose above the horizon. The clock would strike while it was still dark outside, and her tired body, accustomed to the struggle for survival, would rise from the small bed in the small room at the back of the mansion. The space was simple, almost claustrophobic, with a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a small window through which light filtered in timidly. But for her, that corner was a refuge, even within, a world that didn't belong to her. As she walked through the long, luxurious hallways, she kept her gaze downcast, as if instinctively avoiding any possibility of being noticed. The sounds she made were minimal: the brush of her broom against the marble floor, the barely audible crackle of a damp cloth wiping down oak furniture, the discreet click of doors closing after each cleaning. To her family, she was invisible. To the occasional guests, she was just the maid. But to the house, she was the soul that kept everything running, the strength that sustained what seemed perfect. The billionaire, a businessman accustomed to giving orders and accumulating victories, rarely remembered her. His mind was always immersed in numbers, contracts, and strategies. For him, home was merely a resting place between meetings, a place where he wanted no problems, only silence. And the maid knew this. Therefore, her routine was governed by an implicit rule: not to attract attention, serve without existing, work without being remembered. But there was someone who saw it differently. The billionaire's young son, just 5 years old, had a curious and innocent look, able to see beyond appearances. To him, the mansion was not an enchanted palace, but a gilded prison, filled with expensive toys, but devoid of affection, supervised by nannies and tutors, but lacking in human warmth. And it was in this void that the maid's figure began to stand out. She hadn't planned this. She didn't want to create bonds that might compromise her position. She knew her role was to serve, not to get close. But her every gesture carried a discreet tenderness that no trained nanny could replicate. When she tidied the boy's room, she carefully arranged the blankets so he would sleep warm. When she arranged his toys, she placed them in a way that seemed prepared for a surprise, almost as if to say, "Look, someone thought of you." When she opened the curtains, she let the sunlight in gently, without blinding his delicate eyes. And the boy, sensitive as only a child can be, noticed. He began to follow her with his eyes, seeking her presence in the hallways, smiling when she passed. Small details that escaped his father's busy gaze, but which transformed into an entire universe for that childlike heart. It was in these moments that the contrast was revealed with force. On one side, the adult world, full of wealth and power, contracts, meetings, urgent phone calls, and social commitments. On the other hand, the simplicity of the presence of someone who carried courage, human resilience, the emotional journey, in every silent gesture. The boy found in her what he had never found in his own father: true affection. Little by little, this bond began to intensify. The boy, previously so isolated in his routine of empty luxury, began seeking out the maid instead of the nannies. Instead of running to show a drawing or a toy to his father, who was always too busy, he would take it to her, who would stop her work for just a few seconds to admire his creation. Her smile, even shy, was enough to make him feel like someone truly cared. And with each passing day, this connection grew, invisible to the billionaire's eyes, yet charged with meaning. What seemed like an everyday detail was actually building a secret bridge between two worlds: poverty and wealth, servitude and power, invisibility and a commanding presence. This seemingly simple beginning hid the omen of a dramatic revelation, of a plot twist captivating, because a child, in his innocence, knows nothing of the barriers imposed by society. For him, those who offer love become family, and soon those words would echo like thunder within that silent mansion. Mommy. The billionaire had no idea that the biggest surprise of his life would not come from an international negotiation or a corporate betrayal. He was used to thriller, suspense, true crime in the business world, but he never imagined that an even more powerful drama was being written within his own home. The mansion, so accustomed to echoing only silence, was about to become the stage for intense mystery, a revelation capable of forever changing the fate of that family. Because in the heart of a child, the truth manifests itself unfiltered, and when that truth comes to light, not all the fortune in the world can silence it. And it was precisely at this point of tension, when the boy's gaze began to focus more intensely on the maid, that the story took its first turn toward the inevitable. The world of luxury, power, and secrets was about to be shaken by something no calculation could have foreseen: the purity of a child's heart, capable of exposing hidden agenda of that house, and to reveal that even the most powerful can be surprised by the unexpected. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those where the mansion seemed suspended in time, with its long hallways, imported carpets, and artificial glow that hid more than it revealed. The billionaire was, as usual, on a business call, locked in his office where screens displayed rising graphs and million-dollar figures. The rest of the family was busy with social engagements, exquisite dinners, and exclusive trips. And in the midst of this luxury was the boy, alone amid toys that filled the space, but not his soul. It was in this scenario that his gaze turned to the maid. At first it seemed merely curious, like that of any child faced with someone moving with precise gestures, cleaning, organizing, and collecting details no one else noticed. But soon, this gaze ceased to be simple observation and became a search. The boy didn't just look because she was there. He looked because he wanted her to stay there. As she straightened the sheets, he followed her with attentive eyes. As she dusted furniture or lined up books on the shelf, he smiled discreetly, as if discovering a secret no one else had discovered. In her every gesture, he saw something different: patience, care, a kind of delicacy that was missing in everything around him. It was curious how the contrast was evident. His father, always imposing, spoke loudly on the phone, issued quick orders, and demanded results. The boy had grown accustomed to seeing him only as a figure of power, the millionaire that represented wealth and power but no human warmth. The nannies, though trained, had a mechanical way of caring for him. They fed him, bathed him, put him to bed, but without soul, without that spark that makes the difference between obligation and true affection. The maid, however, had something no one else could offer: humanity. It was in the details that the boy noticed this. When he left a toy on the floor, she didn't just pick it up and put it away. Instead, she'd straighten it out as if to say, "It's here for when you want to play again." When she saw him bored, she wouldn't say anything, but she'd find a way to leave a sheet of paper and some crayons nearby, as if offering encouragement without words. These small gestures, invisible to adults, were enormous to the heart of a lonely child. He began to wait for her. He began to notice the time she passed through the hallways. He even sat purposefully in certain places just to see her appear, even if only for a few seconds. And that's how a silent connection was born, a family drama hidden in the heart of that marble mansion. The boy, without realizing it, was assigning her a role he would never dare give to anyone else, the role of mother, not because anyone had taught him this, but because a child's nature knows how to recognize true affection. Little by little, he began to test her presence. One day, he dropped a drawing in which, amidst the scribbles of a family, a female figure in an apron stood beside him. Another day, he called out to her with a shy, "Hey," just to see if she would respond sweetly. And the answer came, always serene, always attentive. The boy's gaze began to take on a greater intensity. He followed her, as if guarding a precious secret. It was as if silently saying, "You are important to me, even if no one notices." And increasingly, the maid found herself facing an internal dilemma. She knew she shouldn't allow this closeness. The mansion had invisible rules, class barriers that separated worlds. But how could she stop something that was born naturally? How could she cut the invisible thread that connected a needy heart to another heart, marked by resilience? At times, she found herself smiling involuntarily at the boy's innocence. At others, she felt the weight of responsibility. She knew that sooner or later, this bond would be noticed. And she deeply feared her boss's reaction. A man accustomed to controlling everything, to keeping up appearances, would never accept that his son would find something in the maid that he didn't find in his own family. But what was at stake wasn't just social protocol. It was an emotional journey that defied any rational calculation. The boy increasingly sought from her what he had never received at home, affection, and this was reflected in every gesture. He began calling her when he was sad. He began showing her his small victories as if he needed her validation to feel happy. Even at mealtimes, he would discreetly glance to see if she was nearby, as if her presence made the environment more bearable. This bond, still silent, held explosive potential, because in stories like this, no secret remains hidden forever. Every lingering look, every knowing smile, every subtle detail was a suspense on the verge of discovery. It was as if the house, with all its long, cold corridors, was conspiring to bring that secret to light. And within the maid's heart, a mixture of contradictory feelings grew. Pride for being recognized in such a pure way. Fear for knowing it could cost her job and her livelihood. Hope because perhaps that bond was the first spark of something greater. The boy, however, knew no boundaries. To him, the world was simple. Those who offer love become family. And this innocent truth was also the greatest threat to the balance of that mansion. Because when he called the maid a word no one expected to hear, Mommy, the plot twist definitive would be released. This growing connection wasn't just a matter of affection. It was the harbinger of a revelation that would expose the shocking secrets hidden behind the luxury. The boy didn't know it, but his constant gaze, his disarming innocence, and his hungry heart were about to trigger an irreversible change. What began as simple childish curiosity gradually transformed into a suspenseful narrative, a plot worthy of true crime style, but with undertones of love, courage, and invisible betrayal. Because the moment he chose to see the maid as more than just an employee, he also planted the seed of a drama that would forever change the family's destiny. The billionaire, so attentive to the numbers, so accustomed to seeing threats in the financial market, failed to realize that the real threat to his empire didn't come from outside. It was growing within his own home, in the innocent gaze of his son, and in the silent heart of the woman he had never truly met. And it was only a matter of time before this secret, hidden in silent glances and gestures, came to light in the form of words. Simple, pure words, but charged with a power that no million-dollar contract could control. The billionaire was accustomed to having absolute control over everything: the market, the companies, the people around him. Nothing escaped his calculating eye, nothing slipped past his strategic radar. He hadn't built his empire by accident. Every investment, every decision, every word spoken in meetings was part of a cold engineering process that had taken him to the top. He was a man who saw risks before they became threats, who eliminated problems before they even existed. And yet, within his own home, something was beginning to slip through his fingers, beyond his control. It all started with small, almost imperceptible details, but ones that a man like him would never fail to notice. His son, normally apathetic and distant, now seemed different. His eyes shone with a peculiar glow when he was in the maid's presence. The billionaire couldn't quite explain it, but he noticed a subtle shift in the air, as if an invisible energy coursed through the room whenever she entered the scene. At dinner, the boy barely paid attention to the expensive dishes prepared by the French chef. Instead, his eyes discreetly scanned the hallway, as if waiting for someone. Sometimes he even smiled involuntarily, and this smile, so rare, aroused in his father a mixture of pride and discomfort. Who had caused this? It was on one of these nights that the billionaire noticed the most disturbing detail. The boy holding a napkin seemed distracted, drawing with his finger on the cloth as if trying to reproduce an invisible shape. Approaching it, the man realized it was a small circle with a line beside it, a simple figure that, to anyone else, would mean nothing, but not to him. The billionaire was obsessed with meaning, with hidden patterns, and that gesture carried a message. He was connected to the maid. He had no proof, but he had intuition. And his intuition never failed. It was then that he began to observe more closely. Meetings and travel lost some of their priority, something rare in his life, because now there was a mystery within his own home, and this mystery was more disturbing than any financial threat. In the hallways, he began to notice how his son reacted when the maid was around. As soon as she walked in, his eyes came to life, and worse still, there were times when he followed her with his gaze as if she were the only person who mattered. The billionaire tried to ignore it, to rationalize it, but he couldn't. With each passing day, the distrust grew like a shadow. One morning, coming down earlier than usual, he caught a seemingly ordinary scene. The maid tidying the living room while his son watched her sitting on the sofa. But there was something in the way he looked at her. Something too profound to be mere childish admiration. The father paused for a moment, hidden behind the door, and watched in silence. The boy smiled. The maid responded with a discreet nod. A simple gesture, but one that carried a complicity impossible to ignore. The billionaire's heart tightened strangely. He didn't know if it was jealousy, fear, or anger. But he knew he was facing something he couldn't allow. His son, the heir to his fortune, couldn't form such intimate bonds with an outsider, especially a humble woman, marked by poverty, who worked in his house just to survive. It was unacceptable that the line between social classes be crossed in such a way. From that moment on, his mind began to work as if in a thriller every detail was a clue, every smile a piece of evidence. He found himself questioning his own. Employees trying to pry information from them, but they all refused to get any closer than necessary. This only increased his paranoia. In his office, facing the stock screens and reports, the billionaire's mind kept returning to the same point, his son and his maid. It was as if a hidden agenda was being built inside his house without his having any control, and that, for him, was unacceptable. One rainy afternoon, he decided to act more directly. He called his son into the office and began asking subtle but thoughtful questions. He wanted to know who he spent the most time with, who made him smile, who he considered special. The boy, too innocent to hide it, mentioned the maid casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He said she was nice, that she made him feel good. These words fell like knives to the billionaire's heart. He realized painfully that he was losing his place in his own son's life, and not to another family member, not to a guardian, but to someone he considered insignificant. The feeling of betrayal, began to eat away at his mind. That night, lying in his huge, lonely bed, he couldn't sleep. Images flashed through his mind, mixing reality and imagination. He saw his son calling the maid a forbidden name, saw them sharing moments that should have belonged only to him, saw his authority slowly eroding. And it was in this state of tormented vigilance that the billionaire decided. He had to take action. He couldn't allow this to turn into a scandal, into adramatic storytelling capable of tarnishing his name. After all, in his world, there was no room for weakness. He had built a reputation based on strength, discipline, and absolute control. If it came to light that his son saw the maid as more than an employee, that would be a plot twist humiliating, a wound to his pride and a risk to his legacy. From then on, his relationship with the maid began to change. He began to observe her silently, evaluating every gesture, every word. In trivial meetings, he would ask subtle questions, testing her answers, like someone conducting a crime investigation invisible. He didn't look for obvious proof, but for signs. And with each sign he perceived, his anger grew. There were times when he almost confronted her directly, but he held back. He wanted to be sure before acting, because in his world, acting without proof was a sign of weakness, and he couldn't afford that luxury. The tension in the mansion grew with each passing day. The innocent boy didn't notice, but the maid felt it. She knew her master was colder, more distant, more hostile, and this hostility, silent but piercing, weighed like a cloud over her. The billionaire, in turn, sank deeper and deeper into his paranoia. He began to see the situation as a battle for his son's soul, and in this battle he was willing to use every weapon he had. What he didn't know was that by trying to control his son's feelings, he was only accelerating the inevitable. Because the more he tried to push them away, the more the boy sought the maid's presence, and this, sooner or later, would explode into an unavoidable confrontation. Deep down, the billionaire already sensed what was coming. A revelation, a shocking secret exposed before everyone. And this revelation would not only change his relationship with his son, but would shake the foundations of his entire life. The mansion seemed quieter than ever that night. The clock struck almost midnight, but no one could sleep. The billionaire paced his office like a caged lion, fueled by a mixture of rage and fear. Outside, the rain pounded against the enormous glass windows, and lightning lit the room for seconds, casting its shadow on the walls as if it were a monster about to attack. He knew he had reached his limit. The suspicions were no longer just assumptions. To him, they were now unquestionable truths. His son was becoming attached to the maid in a way that defied all the rules that had sustained his life. And this for someone who had built an empire based on discipline, hierarchy, and absolute power was intolerable. Holding a glass of expensive whiskey, he watched the raindrops trickle down the glass as his mind raced. He wondered at what point he had lost control. He had always been able to predict competitors' moves, foresee financial crises, anticipate betrayals in board meetings. But here, in his own home, he had been deceived by his son's naivete and the nearly invisible presence of a simple maid. It was as if he had been stabbed in the very fortress. Suddenly he heard footsteps. The boy, awake, descended the stairs silently. But he wasn't alone. The maid was right behind him, holding a blanket over his shoulders. It was a loving, natural, almost maternal gesture. To anyone else it might have seemed like mere kindness. But in the billionaire's eyes it was enough to ignite his fury. He dropped the glass violently on the table, the liquids splashing, onto the Persian rug, and stood up. The crash made them both look toward the office. The boy shivered. The maid, in turn, felt a chill run down her spine. She knew something was about to happen. "Come here. Now." His voice boomed low, full of authority and threat. The son immediately obeyed, innocent, unaware of the storm that was about to brew. The waitress hesitated for a second, but then also walked to the office door. The air seemed heavier with each step, as if the room itself knew it was, about to witness a scene that would forever change the fate of that house. Upon entering, the two met the billionaire's gaze, an icy gaze, capable of shattering anyone who dared to confront him. The boy tried to smile, trying to break the tense atmosphere, but his father didn't respond. The maid lowered her eyes, trying to remain silent as she always did. "You," the billionaire said, pointing at her. "Sit down." She obeyed, sitting on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped in her lap, trembling slightly. "And you," he turned to his son, "tell me, what exactly does this closeness mean?" The boy blinked a few times, not understanding. "Closeness, Dad? Don't lie to me," the man's voice echoed, immediately silencing the boy. "You think I don't see? You think I'm blind? You smile at her, you watch her, you trust her more than you trust me." The boy, frightened, didn't know how to respond. The maid, her heart racing, tried to intervene but remained silent. Until the billionaire, unable to control himself, advanced toward her. "What have you done to my son?" His voice was now a roar. "What trick did you use? What hidden past did you bring it into my house?" The maid finally looked up and met his gaze for the first time. There was no arrogance in her expression, but a mixture of pain and courage. "I didn't do anything, sir. I just cared for him like anyone would care for a lonely child." Her voice was firm, despite her fear. The billionaire laughed, a dry, cruel laugh. "I just took care of him? You think I'm stupid? You think I don't realize the forbidden love hidden in that look?" The words fell like stones on the son's heart. He didn't fully understand what his father was implying, but he knew it wasn't fair. He turned to his father with tears in his eyes. "Dad, it's not like that. She's just my friend. She's the only one who listens to me." The billionaire felt the blow of those words. "The only one who listens to me." It was as if his son had openly declared his failure as a father, and that admission hurt him more than any attack from a rival. The tension exploded. He moved even closer to the maid, leaning over her like a predator. "You think you can steal what's mine? You think you can come in here, into this house, and turn my own son against me?" She took a deep breath. She was tired of living in the shadows, tired of being treated as invisible, and in that moment, she found the strength to say something that would change everything. "I'm not stealing anything, sir. Maybe what your son needs never came from you." The silence that followed was deafening. The billionaire stood frozen for a few seconds, unable to believe what he had just heard. Her courage, the audacity to speak those words, ignited an indescribable fury in him, but at the same time, something began to crack inside him. A hidden part, one he'd always suppressed, began to echo those words in his mind. Maybe they were true. Maybe he'd failed. The boy, unable to bear the tension any longer, hugged the maid, crying. The simple yet intense gesture was the final blow. This was no longer just a suspense of assumptions. It was a shocking revelation. The billionaire now saw clearly that he had lost something money could never buy, his own son's heart. And in that embrace, he didn't just see affection. He saw a direct challenge to his authority. A power struggle unfolded there before his eyes, and he knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. The silence after the confrontation was almost unbearable. The billionaire, still standing, breathed heavily, as if each breath were fuel for his pent-up fury. His son remained clinging to the maid, crying softly, while she, motionless, stared into space, knowing the storm had not yet reached its peak. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed midnight, each chime seeming like a countdown to something inevitable. Suddenly, the billionaire turned and, with a sudden gesture, opened his desk drawer. From it, he pulled out a battered leather briefcase, which seemed to carry more weight than its size suggested. He slammed it onto the table, the impact echoing through the room. "You think you can fool me?" he said, his voice deep and full of contempt. "You think I didn't investigate? That I wouldn't find out where you came from?" The maid felt her body go cold. He knew her past was a labyrinth of pain and secrets he'd always kept buried. Secrets that could destroy her if they ever came to light. But she'd never imagined he'd gone so far, that he'd used his resources to delve into the shadows of her life. With steady hands, he opened the briefcase and began spreading documents across the table. Certificates, reports, old photographs. Each paper felt like a fragment of a lost life, forcibly plucked from the darkness. "Look at that," he said, holding up a yellowed photo. "This is you, isn't it? Long before you showed up at my house feigning humility. You hid from everyone, but not from me." The maid held her breath. It was as if each image were an open wound. There she was, younger, in places she'd rather forget, surrounded by people who no longer existed in her life. "You think you're smart," the billionaire continued, "but all you did was trade a hidden past for a victim role. And now, finally, the truth is here." The son, confused, looked at the papers without understanding. "Dad, what are you talking about? What truth is this?" The billionaire turned to him, raising a document like a weapon. "The truth, my son, is that this woman is not who you think. She's not just a maid. She comes from a dirty history of betrayals, of debts, of crimes that they tried to bury." The words fell like stones, but each syllable seemed to further inflame the atmosphere. The maid, tears welling in her eyes, finally spoke. "Enough." Her voice was firm, surprising even herself. "You have no right to use my past as a weapon." The billionaire laughed, a sharp laugh. "Right? I have every right. This is my home, my son, my life. You came here like a shadow, but I brought you into the light. Now everyone will see who you truly are." She closed her eyes for a moment. She was exhausted from running, from hiding. Maybe it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. If it's the truth you want, then listen. She opened her eyes and looked directly at the billionaire, no longer afraid. "Yes, I have a past. Yes, I made mistakes, but I also paid for each one. I lost everything. I lost family, I lost friends, I lost my identity. All I had left was to start over, even if it was as a maid in a house where I would never be seen as human." The shocked son grabbed her hand. "Mom, is that what he's saying? That you—" She turned to him with a look filled with pain, but also tenderness. "I'm not your mother, my dear, but I know that at many times I felt as if I were, because you gave me something I never thought I'd have again, a reason to keep going." The confession came like a bolt of lightning. The billionaire, stunned, didn't know whether to react with anger or disbelief. For him, that moment was a mixture of shocking revelation and a direct threat to the control he has always had. But there was more. The maid knew there was still a piece of the puzzle he didn't know about. An even darker secret, kept not out of shame, but out of fear of what it might cause, if revealed. Taking a deep breath, she said, "There's something you don't know. Something your money and your investigators couldn't find, because it's not in any documents. It's in your memory, in your blood." The billionaire narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "What are you trying to insinuate?" She hesitated, but knew there was no turning back. "The reason I stayed in this house isn't just out of necessity. It's because there's a connection between us. A connection you never imagined." Silence fell again, heavy, suffocating. The son looked from one to the other, unable to comprehend. The billionaire, however, felt a chill run down his spine. For a moment, control slipped from his grasp. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. She took a deep breath and stared at him firmly. "I'm talking about a secret that involves you. A secret that could destroy not only your image, but everything you believe yourself to be." The words echoed like thunder. The son's eyes widened, sensing he was about to discover something that would change his life forever. The billionaire, in turn, felt the security of years crumble in a matter of seconds. And in that instant, the story stopped being just a conflict between boss and maid. It became a thriller of revelations that could ruin an entire family, because deep down, everyone knew the worst was yet to come. The silence that followed the revelation was heavier than any scream. The billionaire, once an imposing man, seemed cowed by the maid's words. Her son, for his part, still held her hand, as if that gesture were the only anchor amidst the sea of uncertainty surrounding him. The documents scattered across the table were no longer just paper. They were invisible chains, connecting past and present in a cruel and inescapable way. The clock on the wall ticked away each second like a sentence. The billionaire closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize his thoughts. But all he could feel was a mixture of anger and fear. Anger at losing control of the situation. Fear, because for the first time, he realized there were things his money and power couldn't hide. "Father." His son's voice broke the silence. It was choked, but carried an unexpected strength. What did she mean? What connection is this? The billionaire took a deep breath and, instead of answering, turned to the maid as if demanding she continue. The tension in the air was almost palpable. She, for her part, knew there was no turning back. The secret he'd kept for so long now pulsed on the brink of revelation. But before he could speak, the billionaire raised his hand. "No," he said firmly, but his voice was shaking. "You will not destroy my family with your lies." The son frowned. "Lies? Dad, she doesn't seem to be lying. And if she were, why would you be so upset?" That question struck the billionaire like an arrow. He had always been the master of truth, the man everyone obeyed without question. But in front of his own son, his authority crumbled. The boy saw what had previously been hidden, a dark secret that threatened the integrity of everything they had built. "You don't understand, my son," he said, his voice lower. "There are things that need to stay buried, things you couldn't bear to know." "Buried?" The son released the maid's hand and stepped forward. "Are you telling me you'd rather keep me in the dark than let me know the truth?" The billionaire didn't answer. His silence was more revealing than any words. His son felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The maid, seeing the rift opening between father and son, finally gathered her courage. "He's right about one thing. The truth hurts, but it also sets you free. And that's what you need right now. Liberation." Her son looked at her, his eyes brimming with tears. "Please, tell me. I need to know." The maid's breathing quickened. Her hands trembled, but there was a firmness in her voice. "The bond between us isn't just professional. It's not just gratitude. It's blood." The billionaire stepped forward, his eyes wide. "Shut up!" But it was too late. The word had been spoken, and its echo hung in the air like thunder. Blood. The son, stunned, felt his heart race. "Blood? You're saying that?" The maid finally let the tears flow. "Yes. You're more mine than his. He never told me because he preferred to erase the past. But I know, and now you know too." The room descended into silent chaos. The billionaire collapsed into his armchair, burying his face in his hands. The image of a powerful man who dominated everything was shattered. His son, on the other hand, felt a turmoil within him. Betrayal, pain, but also a strange relief at finally beginning to understand who he truly was. "So, all this," he murmured, "this distance, these fights, this feeling that something was always wrong, was because of this secret." The billionaire lifted his head, his eyes red with tears he would never admit. "I did everything to protect you. You don't understand. I wanted you to have a clean life, free, from the stains of my past." The son shook his head in disbelief. "Protection? That's not protection, Dad. That's betrayal. You robbed me of the truth about myself." The word betrayal echoed through the room, heavy, irreversible. The gulf between them was now more than evident. The maid placed her hand on her son's shoulder. He thought he could control everything. But life can't be controlled. It's lived. With every second, the son grew emotionally distant from his father. With every word, the distance between them grew, until it seemed there was no bridge capable of uniting those two souls again. The billionaire tried to stand, but his legs were shaking. He looked at his son, searching his eyes for some shred of understanding, but all he found was pain and resentment. "I did everything for you," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Everything." The son took a deep breath and replied coldly, "Maybe you did, but not for me. You did it for yourself. To maintain your image, your facade, to hide your hidden truth." The billionaire broke down again, this time in silent tears. For the first time, he wasn't a rich or powerful man. He was just a defeated father, facing the consequences of years of secrets and selfish choices. The son, holding the maid's hand tightly, turned, and began walking toward the door. Each step was like a hammer sealing the family's fate. The abyss wasn't just emotional. Now it was real. And in that moment, everyone knew nothing would ever be the same again. That night, when the mansion's imposing clock struck 9, the silence in the hallways hid something greater than any fortune. The billionaire paced back and forth, his footsteps echoing on the cold marble. He seemed surrounded by everything, yet empty inside. The image of the afternoon's scene wouldn't leave his mind. His son, just 5 years old, had run up to the maid, hugged her tightly, and called her mommy. That sound, that forbidden word, had struck his heart like a double-edged sword. For years, he had convinced himself that money, status, and power were enough to protect his family. But there, before a simple maid, the cruel truth dawned. Who was truly there for the boy? Who offered comfort, and warmth? It wasn't the security guards, the busy nannies, or even he, the father, always tied up in meetings discussing figures and investments. It was that invisible woman, the poor maid with a forgotten past, who had become the only true love figure in his son's life. As he walked, the billionaire's eyes welled up. Memories swirled with the recent scene. He saw himself as a child, motherless, raised by governesses who never called him by his name, only Sir. He swore he would do things differently when he had a family. He swore his son would never feel this lack. But reality showed that even with mansions and luxuries, he had failed. The maid, meanwhile, stood in her small back room trying to hold back her tears. The call of mommy had torn her soul, not because she intended to usurp the boy's mother's place, but because she carried a secret she could no longer hide. Years ago, when life had taken everything from her, dignity, family, dreams, she had clung to that child as an extension of herself. The boy represented what she could never have, what fate had stolen from her. But hearing that title, so intimate, so true, awakened a deep fear in her. What if her boss discovered what was hidden in her past? The tension mounted like a psychological thriller. The billionaire, overcome by a mixture of rage and pain, decided to confront her. It wasn't just his father's jealousy. There was something else, a shadow looming over the situation. He entered the maid's room without knocking, surprising her leaning over the bed, her eyes red from crying. "Why did he call you Mom?" he asked, his voice firm but broken. The woman shuddered. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst. For a moment, he considered denying it, making up an excuse, saying it was just the child's mess. But something inside her, perhaps the courage born of suffering, wouldn't allow her to lie. "Because I love him like a son," he replied, his voice low but firm. "Because when he cries, I'm the one who runs. When he's afraid, he hides in my lap. I never wanted that title, sir, but he was born alone, from his heart." The words fell like bombs on the billionaire's heart. Part of him wanted to throw her out immediately, accuse her of overstepping her bounds. But another part, the human, wounded, forgotten part, knew it was the absolute truth. How many times had he ignored the signs? How many times had his son preferred the maid's arms to his? The internal conflict was devastating. On one side, the pride of a man accustomed to having everything under control. On the other, guilt, a sense of injustice, and the recognition of his own failure. He turned away, unable to look at her, and left. But as he closed the door, he heard her stifled sob. That sound echoed within him more than any counsel from advisors or voices from partners. The next day, the billionaire decided to observe without being seen. He watched, hidden behind the half-open door, as his son ran into the maid's arms as soon as he woke up. The boy called her affectionately, and she welcomed him as if he were her own flesh and blood. There was no malice, no lies. There was only genuine love, something that cannot be bought, negotiated, or manufactured. It was a family, drama worthy of a movie plot, full of suspense and hidden secrets. The most powerful man in the city, owner of empires, discovered that his true wealth was threatened by the poverty of his own heart. Meanwhile, rumors were circulating quietly among the house staff. Some said the maid was hiding a dark past, a dark secret that could change everything. Others believed the billionaire was on the verge of an unprecedented emotional crisis. The atmosphere in the mansion was tense, as if everyone were inside a mystery story, about to witness a plot twist unexpected. That same night, the billionaire called the maid to the library for a chat. The place, filled with rare books and hidden secrets, seemed the perfect setting for a decisive revelation. "I need to know the truth," he said, looking her in the eyes. "Who are you, really? Why does my son feel such a strong bond with you?" The maid trembled, but knew she could no longer run away. The silence lasted for seconds that felt like hours, until she took a deep breath and began to tell her story. It was a story of pain, injustice, and survival. She had lost a baby years ago, a victim of a tragedy that left her forever scarred. Since then, she had worked in silence, trying to rebuild her life. When she found that boy, still a baby, she saw in him a chance to love again, even if he wasn't her own flesh and blood. Tears streamed down the billionaire's face. For the first time in years, he cried without caring who saw him. The weight of that revelation crushed him. It wasn't just his son who had found a loving mother. It was he who, for the first time, saw what truly mattered. At the height of his emotion, he stood up and hugged the maid. Not as boss and employee, but as two broken human beings who finally understood each other. And in that embrace, full of suspense, excitement, and revelation, a new truth was born. Sometimes the greatest fortunes are hidden in the most unlikely places, and the most powerful stories are those that reveal our own humanity. He knew the public would never understand, that tabloids would turn it into a scandal. But for once, it didn't matter. For once, the billionaire wasn't concerned with his image, but with his heart. So when his son ran back and called the maid mommy, the billionaire didn't yell, scold, or correct her. He just let the tears fall, silently, understanding that this was the greatest plot twist of your life. And now, I ask you, what would you have done in his place? Would you have the courage to admit the truth in front of everyone? Or would you hide this secret, keeping up appearances? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel for more intense stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of humanity and courage. The following days in the mansion became a silent battlefield, where every look and every gesture carried a weight greater than any fortune. The billionaire, though still torn by the revelation, couldn't sleep peacefully. The scene of his son calling the maid mother replayed in his mind like a never-ending movie. He wondered, was he losing his place in the boy's life? Or perhaps he was faced with an opportunity to finally free himself from the prison of pride that had kept him distant. Meanwhile, the maid lived in constant fear. She knew that one wrong word could cost her her job, her security, and even the peaceful life she was trying to build. However, there was something stronger than fear, her bond with the child. It wasn't just a passing affection. It was a connection that defied explanation, emotional journey that made her face each day with more courage. One morning, as the sun gilded the mansion's curtains, the billionaire noticed something that made him even more uneasy. From the top of the stairs, he saw his son running down the hallway, laughing, with the maid trailing behind trying to catch up. There was a lightness in the scene, a purity that money couldn't buy. He realized bitterly that he had never played with the boy like this. His presence had always been limited to expensive gifts, trips planned by assistants, cold words, and few displays of affection. His heart was being torn by a crisis of conscience. It was as if all the choices he'd made up until that point, focusing on his career, accumulating more wealth, building business empires, now lost their meaning in the face of a truth he could no longer ignore. He was failing as a father. That night, alone in his luxurious office, surrounded by papers and contracts, he broke down. The pen fell from his hand, and tears smeared the documents on his desk. For the first time, he silently admitted He didn't know how to make up for lost time. Meanwhile, the maid was also struggling with her ghosts. She kept a dark secret that no one in the mansion knew. Before working there, her life had been marked by tragedy. She had lost not only a baby, but an entire family under circumstances she never revealed. Poverty had crushed her, leaving her with no choice but to take any job to survive. Behind her simple appearance lay a broken but resilient woman who had risen with dignity. This secret, however, could change everything if it came to light. The billionaire began quietly investigating her. He discreetly hired a private investigator, determined to discover if her connection with his son had a darker explanation. The suspense grew. Was she hiding something dangerous? Or was it just her own paranoia, born of the fear of losing her son's love? The report arrived in a brown folder left on the desk. The billionaire hesitated before opening it. He felt like a man about to discover not only the truth about the maid, but also about himself. Reading the pages, the shock was immediate. The woman's life was detailed there. Her impoverished past, her struggle to survive, her devastating loss, her loneliness. There was no crime, no manipulation. There was only pain, injustice, and resilience. And most surprising, she had previously worked at a children's home where she volunteered. In other words, the love she felt for his son was not fake. It was part of her very essence. To be plot-twisted changed everything inside him. Instead of anger, he felt shame. Instead of distrust, he felt admiration. And for the first time, he realized that perhaps she was the missing piece in healing his own family's wounds. The conflict reached its peak when a formal dinner was held at the mansion. High society guests were present, all attentive to appearances, luxurious clothes, and the power flowing through crystal glasses. The billionaire's son, restless in his chair, refused to eat. He wept softly, calling for the maid. The guests' eyes turned, and silence fell like a sword. The billionaire froze. It was time to show control, to reassert authority, to silence the boy. But to everyone's surprise, he stood up, walked to the kitchen door, and called for the maid to come. Amidst incredulous stares, he brought her to the main table and, in front of everyone, let his son run into her arms. "If my son calls her mother, it's because she truly loves him," he said, his voice firm but emotional. "And I have no right to deny that love." The confession fell like a bolt of lightning on that cold and calculated atmosphere. The guests, accustomed to stories of betrayal and hidden agendas, witnessed something completely different, an act of humility, of human recognition. The maid trembled, her heart racing. She had never imagined she would be defended like this, especially in front of the elite who looked at her with contempt. She felt torn between gratitude and fear. Would this gesture have consequences? Behind the scenes, whispers and malicious comments spread. Some said it was madness, that the billionaire had lost his mind. Others, more sensible, saw it as an example of rare courage, something they would never witness again in their lives. The son, however, was the only one who truly smiled. In his childlike eyes there was no judgment, only happiness. For him, life was simple. He found love where it existed, not where it was supposed to exist out of obligation. That night, the billionaire and the maid talked for hours, hidden from view. He admitted he had made a mistake, that he had let his pride and obsession with wealth distract him from what mattered most. He apologized not as a boss, but as a man. "You gave my son something that I, with all my money, could never give," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "You gave him a mother's love." She cried too, confessing her fear, her secret, and the pain of a past that had never healed. And there, in that intimate conversation, something unexpected was born. Not romance, but respect, understanding, and a silent alliance that would transform everyone's future. The mystery was not over. The shocking secret from her past could still surface, bringing risks and possible injustices. But in that moment, they both knew they were no longer alone. The billionaire understood that true wealth was not in coffers or contracts, but in relationships built with courage and humanity. The waitress realized that even in a world of wealth and power, there were still hearts capable of recognizing the truth. And you? What would you do if you saw your child calling someone else mom? If you were in the billionaire's shoes, would you have the courage to admit your mistake? Or would you let pride and appearances get the better of you? Leave your comment below, subscribe for more intense stories like this, and don't forget to share, because stories like these carry lessons worth more than gold. The days after the dinner that changed everything for the mansion were steeped in silent tension. The maid, though now protected by the billionaire's recognition, felt the weight of the secret she carried, as if at any moment it could slip from her control and destroy all the stability she had worked so hard to achieve. The shock of the latest revelation, that her painful past and her dedication to the billionaire's son had transformed everyone's perception, didn't erase the fear that coursed through every fiber of her being. She knew that deep down, there lay an even darker secret, something that could radically change the dynamics of the wealthy family, and that was about to emerge from the shadow of time. While the billionaire tried to restore some semblance of normalcy, hiring consultants and planning business trips, the maid watched the man's son with a careful eye. The boy, innocent and carefree, still ran through the halls as if nothing had happened, laughing and begging for attention. But there was something in that joy that reminded her of her past, a past of loss and danger that had cruelly marked her life long before she entered that mansion. She remembered the dark streets, the night everything fell apart, what forced her to become too strong, too soon. The shocking secret began to reveal itself through small clues she herself inadvertently missed. An old letter fell from a drawer while she was searching for something for the billionaire's son. The yellowed ink and worn paper carried words that evoked memories she should never confront again. Engraved within that letter was the name of a powerful man, someone she had fled years ago. Someone capable of destroying not only her reputation, but her entire life. It was a secret of unsolved crimes, of a family that had betrayed her and still held enough influence to tarnish her existence with lies and false accusations. The billionaire, even in his moments of distraction, began to notice small changes in the maid. There was a weight in her gaze, a hesitation in the way she moved through the hallways, an extreme care not to reveal details of her own life. Accustomed to analyzing businesses and people, he realized something was about to explode, and that this explosion could directly affect his relationship with his son. The fear of losing their newfound bond became palpable. One night, during a storm that painted the mansion's windows silver, the maid received an unexpected visitor. An imposing-looking man entered without permission, his presence betraying a past she had tried to bury. He was tall, dressed expensively but discreetly, and carried an aura of authority that made her heart race. His gaze was penetrating, knowing, and the initial silence spoke more than any words could. She knew who it was, the man the letter spoke of, someone with power, influence, and a will to exact revenge. The billionaire, sensing something amiss, rushed to the room where she was talking to the stranger. Upon entering, she immediately felt the weight of that presence. The air seemed thicker, as if each breath were measured and weighed. The stranger was undaunted by the man's wealth or position. He looked at the maid, then at the billionaire, with a cold, calculating smile, as if holding all the cards, and began to speak. His words were carefully chosen, each phrase laden with veiled threat and memories of a past she longed to forget. He mentioned events no one in the mansion knew about, fraud, betrayal, and losses that had marked the maid's life. He knew details only she could share, and he used this as a weapon to pressure her. The billionaire, initially confused, realized this was the plot twist that would change the entire narrative once again. It wasn't just about love, courage, or caring for his son. There were deeper layers of intrigue, manipulation, and danger. And the boy, though oblivious to the context, was about to be affected by decisions made by adults who would spare no effort to protect or destroy. The maid, however, surprised everyone with her calm. Instead of giving in to pressure, she began to tell part of her story, revealing not only her suffering but also the resilience that defined her. She spoke of irreparable losses, impossible choices, and her determination to protect those who depended on her, regardless of the consequences. Her words carried emotion, humanity, and truth, and began to penetrate the powerful man's cold facade. The billionaire watched, torn between fear and admiration. He knew his son's safety depended on his actions. He couldn't allow her past to become a real threat to the present he was building. At the same time, he understood that that past, so dark and full of pain, was also the reason the bond between the maid and his son was so genuine and deep. As the storm raged outside, tensions inside the mansion reached a boiling point. Words were exchanged, threats made, memories recalled. The shocking secret about to emerge revealed not only the maid's life, but also the fragility of human relationships in the face of power, wealth, and appearances. Every gesture, every facial expression carried multiple layers of meaning. Past and present collided, and everyone's future hung in delicate balance. At the climax of this silent confrontation, something unexpected happened. The man who had come to threaten the maid showed a hesitation, a moment of doubt that no one could have foreseen. He realized that, despite all the power and influence he wielded, he could not erase the bond that true humanity creates. He could not manufacture love, trust, or courage. And in that moment, the maid was no longer a mere figure from the past. She was the guardian of a truth that transcended wealth, status, and appearances. The billionaire then made a decision that surprised even his own maid. Instead of confronting the intruder directly, he positioned himself strategically, using his authority and persuasion to neutralize the risk. It wasn't just an act of wealth or power, but of emotional intelligence, understanding, and respect for the courage of those who faced their past fearlessly. The tension eased, but the mystery of the shocking secret still lingered in the air, creating a suspense that kept everyone in the mansion on constant alert. At the end of that night, the maid remained steadfast, not only protected by the billionaire, but also strengthened by her own history. Her past hadn't disappeared, but now it had been confronted, and this confrontation brought forth not only danger, but also admiration and respect. The boy, oblivious to everything, slept peacefully, protected by those who understood that true love and courage often come from where they are least expected. The suspense remained in the air as the final plot twist was yet to come. Everyone in the mansion knew the story wouldn't end there, but something had changed forever. The truth, when revealed with courage and integrity, can transform enemies into allies, fear into admiration, and risk into a lesson in humanity no one will ever forget. The mansion seemed to breathe with the same tension that consumed the maid's mind. Every hallway, every room, every piece of furniture seemed to hold a fragment of the history she had tried to bury for so long. The maid felt that the shocking secret she carried was no longer just a memory of the past. It was a living force, always lurking, ready to reveal itself. While organizing old documents in the library, she found a photograph nearly faded by time. The image made her tremble. It showed faces she thought she would never see again, places and people that carried memories of pain, loss, and betrayal. The billionaire, observing her frightened expression from afar, sensed something approaching. He no longer saw the maid as simply someone who cared for his son. He saw in her courage, resilience, and, above all, a genuine bond with the child that no amount of wealth could replace. He also felt a premonition. Her past was about to invade her present, and that could change everything. That morning, as the sun timidly illuminated the library, the maid received an anonymous letter. The envelope was simple, but the contents shook her to her core. Cold, almost calculating words referenced past events she believed were buried. Each line recalled losses and injustices that had shaped her, but also threatened to expose secrets that could destroy the stability she had achieved. Tension mounted. She knew that any misstep could ruin her life, her position, and even the boy's safety. The billionaire, realizing the gravity of the situation, decided to act. Discreet and cautious, he hired a private investigator to discover who was behind these messages, but without directly interfering in the household's routine. He needed to protect not only the maid, but also his son, and understand how much of her past was dangerous and how much was merely fear and trauma. Suspense hung over the mansion like a constant shadow. As the days went by, small incidents began to occur. Objects mysteriously disappeared, unsigned notes appeared in unexpected places, and curious eyes watched the maid, suggesting someone was trying to probe every detail of her life. Fear grew, but along with it, a quiet determination blossomed. She realized she had to face this head-on, before the threat became unbearable. Finally, the intruder introduced himself. With an air of calculating coldness and detailed knowledge of the maid's life, he provoked an almost unbearable tension. Every word was measured, every gesture charged with meaning. The billionaire, remaining calm, observed every movement. He understood that this confrontation was not only about her past, but also about the values that governed his own life: power, control, and the ability to protect those he loved. The maid, despite her fear, showed impressive courage. She shared part of her story, revealing her pain, her losses, and the reason she loved and cared for the child with such dedication. The billionaire was surprised to realize that, besides being loyal and dedicated, she possessed a moral strength he had never encountered in anyone around him. Each revelation brought the maid and her son closer, strengthening the bond that became increasingly unbreakable. As night fell over the mansion, the suspense reached its peak. The intruder made it clear he could expose even more devastating details, but he hadn't counted on the maid's intelligence and courage, nor on the billionaire's firm presence. The tension transformed into a delicate dance of power and protection. Every strategic move, every gesture of empathy or assertiveness, changed the dynamics of the silent game taking place within the mansion's luxurious walls. The final revelation of the block showed that, despite all the threats, there was an invisible force protecting the maid, her genuine bond with the boy. It was a love that transcended wealth, power, and fear, and that, in a way, defied all logic. The billionaire finally realized that his obsession with status and control could not compare to the strength of character of this simple yet extraordinarily resilient woman. The plot twist emerged. Her past would not be an instrument of destruction, but a catalyst for the rebuilding of human relationships within the mansion. The tension reached a new level. The billionaire knew that to protect his son and ensure the family's stability, he needed to courageously confront the truth and allow the maid to reveal the shocking secret of her past. Each morning brought new memories. Each night was haunted by uncertainty. The woman who cared for his son was now the key to the truth, and her story had the power to change not only the boy's future, but also the billionaire's perception of love, family, and humanity. The maid began revealing details of her life that no one could have imagined. Irreparable losses, injustices that shaped her, and moments of despair that made her the resilient woman they knew. She spoke of surviving extreme poverty, of people who betrayed her, and of difficult choices that shaped her character. Every word carried emotion, and each story deepened the billionaire's respect. He realized he was faced with a story of human resilience that no amount of money could buy. The suspense heightened when the intruder reappeared, demanding answers and threatening to expose more details of her past. His presence created an almost unbearable atmosphere where every gesture and look became charged with multiple meanings. The maid, however, maintained her composure, demonstrating that true courage lies not in power or status, but in the ability to face one's past with dignity. The billionaire, now deeply involved, took discreet measures to protect the maid. He realized his role was not to control, but to offer support and create space for the truth to emerge without fear. The dynamics of the mansion changed radically. Tension and danger became an opportunity to demonstrate trust, respect, and humanity. Each revelation brought the maid closer to the billionaire's son, solidifying the bond that became increasingly unbreakable. The plot twist in this segment was both devastating and inspiring. The maid revealed that despite all the tragedies she'd endured, she'd learned to transform pain into empathy, fear into courage, and loss into moral strength. This revelation not only shocked those present, but also transformed the billionaire's view of true wealth. He understood that character, genuine love, and dedication are worth far more than money or social status. The suspense of the past still lingered, but now it was accompanied by hope, understanding, and the promise of a secure future. Each character began to see that the story wasn't just about secrets and power, but about redemption, love, and the ability to rewrite one's own destiny. The empowered maid knew she was ready to face any challenge, while the billionaire began to understand the true value of what he held in his hands. The opportunity to learn to be a real father. The air in the mansion seemed charged with electricity, every corner of the house reflecting the silent tension that permeated the hallways. The billionaire was aware that the decisive moment was approaching. He knew that the shocking secret from the maid's past was about to be fully revealed, and that this could shake the foundations of the family and everyone who lived there. Her every step was watched, her every gesture recorded. But this time there was not only fear in the air, there was also determination, courage, and an unbreakable will to face truths that until then had remained buried. The maid woke early that morning, the sun still timidly trying to penetrate the suite's heavy curtains. Her heart beat fast, not from fear of what was to come, but from the weight of what she finally needed to confront. She knew that the past she carried was not just a personal burden. It was a story of injustice, betrayal, and suffering that had shaped every aspect of her life. Each memory was like a broken mirror, reflecting fragments of pain she had tried to ignore, but which now demanded to be faced. The dark secret she had protected for years was about to emerge uncontrollably, and she could no longer hold it back. Meanwhile, the billionaire paced the main hall, carefully observing every detail of the house. The quiet atmosphere contrasted with the inner turmoil of his thoughts. He no longer focused solely on the maid or his son. Now his mind was focused on understanding the human complexity that surrounded him. He reflected on his own life, the mistakes he had made, and the missed opportunities to connect with those he loved. Each past failure became more evident, and he realized that the impending revelation could also be his chance to redeem himself, not only as a father, but as a man. The first sign that the story was about to unfold came from an unexpected object, an old box found in the storage room, filled with documents, photographs, and letters yellowed with age. Each item seemed to pulse with memories, each paper carrying the weight of past decisions, irreparable losses, and choices that shaped the maid's life. She opened the box with trembling hands, knowing that every detail inside could change everyone's perception of her and possibly destroy the security she had gained. But there was something stronger than fear. The truth needed to be told. The billionaire watched from afar, without intervening, allowing her to confront her past on her own. He understood that this moment required authenticity and courage, and that any interference could destroy the opportunity for redemption. The maid began to sift through the documents, revealing memories previously unknown to anyone. Stories of loss, betrayal, and abandonment emerged in vivid detail. Institutions that rejected her, close people who failed, loves that faded before they even began. Each page told a part of her life that explained not only her character, but also the intensity of her bond with the billionaire's son. Meanwhile, the son watched closely, sensing the tension, but not fully grasping the gravity of the situation. His innocence contrasted with the emotional complexity unfolding around him. He saw in the maid not just a caregiver, but someone who represented love, security, and protection, elements that his father, despite all his power and wealth, could never fully provide. The bond between the maid and the child became even more evident, and the billionaire began to realize that true wealth lay not in the coffers, but in the human bonds that grew stronger amid adversity. The tension reached a fever pitch when the maid found an old letter, written by someone who had played a crucial role in her past. The letter contained details of events that should never be revealed, and which, if known, could shatter not only her reputation, but everyone's perception of her. It was a document that wove together loss, injustice, and betrayal in a startling way. Each line provoked a mixture of pain, anger, and relief, as she could finally confront what had haunted her for years. The suspense was almost unbearable, but she took a deep breath, determined to face the truth. The billionaire, now at her side, offered silent support without words, just presence. He understood that fully revealing the maid's past required absolute courage, and that any impatient gesture could compromise the impact of the truth. He realized for the first time that his role was not to judge, but to protect and understand. The weight of the hidden agenda hanging over the mansion became more evident. Some truths are too powerful to remain hidden, and now the opportunity to face those truths had arrived. When the maid finally shared the most painful details of her past, the atmosphere in the mansion changed dramatically. There was not just shock, but also silent admiration. The stories of injustice, poverty, and resilience revealed a woman who, despite all obstacles, had risen with dignity and moral strength. Each account was imbued with emotion, and each word was a bridge to human understanding, transforming the billionaire's perception and further solidifying his relationship with his son. The emotional narrative reached its climax. Past and present met, and the maid's true essence was finally recognized. The suspense, however, wasn't over. The revelation raised new questions. How would the other family members react? What secrets were still hidden? Who could exploit this information to manipulate or harm? The maid knew she was vulnerable, but now she was also strengthened by the truth and the unbreakable bond with the child. The billionaire, in turn, began to understand that the love and trust developing there were more powerful than any wealth or social status. The episode ends with palpable tension. The shocking secret from the maid's past was no longer just a burden. It became a force capable of transforming the family dynamic, redefining relationships, and teaching lessons about courage, love, and resilience. Each character, consciously or not, was about to enter the final act of a narrative that combined mystery, drama, and emotion in epic proportions. Anticipation for the final climax was mounting, and viewers were on the verge of discovering how all the secrets would intertwine in a shocking and unforgettable outcome. The rising sun bathed the mansion in hues of gold and amber, but the morning tranquility seemed only a facade, a delicate curtain, hiding the whirlwind of emotions that hovered over every hallway, every room, every gaze. The billionaire remained in his office, seated at the imposing polished mahogany desk, but the distance between him and the papers before him was greater than any ocean. The contracts, figures, and business decisions lost meaning before the crushing weight of his recent discoveries. His son had called the maid mother, and in that moment, no wealth, no title, no influence could undo the truth that confronted him. He felt vulnerable, exposed, his pride shattered, and an emotional void that no fortune could fill. Meanwhile, the maid silently prepared to face the moment that would definitively change the dynamics of the mansion. She knew the revelation of the shocking secret from her past was inevitable. Silence was no longer an option. With each step toward the living room, she felt the tension mounting, not only from the possibility of rejection or judgment, but from the responsibility she bore. It wasn't just about her reputation, but also about the boy's emotional well-being. The Billionaire's trust, and the very integrity she had preserved throughout her life. Her determination was silent but intense. Every gesture carried a fortitude learned through adversity, every breath a testament to her resilience. Upon entering the room, she found all the family members gathered. There were looks of curiosity, distrust, and, for some, almost palpable disbelief. The billionaire accompanied her, maintaining a firm posture but conveying silent support. He understood that any hesitation, any hint of fear, could undermine the credibility of the maid's narrative. It was time to reveal not only the truth of her past, but the essence of her character, a story of courage, suffering, resilience, and genuine love. She began to recount her life calmly and clearly, detailing the poverty that had marked her since childhood, the moments of despair, the devastating losses that shaped her, and the loneliness that forced her to continually reinvent herself. She revealed her dedication to volunteering in foster care, her passion for caring for children, and, most importantly, the authenticity of her feelings for the billionaire's son. Every word was charged with emotion, every pause strategically placed to allow the intensity of her narrative to penetrate the hearts of her listeners. The tension in the room was almost tangible. The billionaire watched, struggling with a mix of conflicting emotions: shame, respect, gratitude, and a painful realization of his own failings. He realized, once again, that wealth and power could never replace the warmth, constant presence, and unconditional love his maid offered his son. Every word she said, every detail of her painful past, made the businessman reconsider everything he believed about authority, wealth, and parental responsibility. Midway through the narrative, an unexpected plot twist emerged. The maid revealed that, years before, she had witnessed the unethical and secret actions of a powerful high society figure, information that could jeopardize reputations, businesses, and entire families. She had never spoken, believing these truths were irrelevant to her work. But now, faced with the possibility of protecting the boy and restoring the billionaire's trust, she felt compelled to share. The silence that followed was heavy, as if everyone in the room was digesting not only the story of pain and resilience, but also the magnitude of the newly revealed information. The billionaire felt a mixture of shock and relief. The revelation not only confirmed his own perception that the maid was trustworthy, but also showed that her courage transcended the need to please or fit into social norms. It was a demonstration of character, ethics, and humanity in their purest form. He understood that, although his position in the world was one of power and wealth, true influence came from those who were able to act with integrity, even in the face of fear. Meanwhile, the boy played near the table, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the events, but silently absorbing every emotion conveyed. His innocence contrasted with the drama of the adults, but it also served as a catalyst for every gesture, every word, every look to carry even greater weight. He was living proof that genuine love didn't need to be recognized by titles, wealth, or social status. It manifested itself naturally through trust, protection, and constant presence. The maid, sensing the tension, continued her narrative, detailing specific moments when she saved the boy's life from minor emergencies and silent dangers unknown to anyone else. Each story illustrated not only courage, but also a deep sense of responsibility and devotion. She revealed how her choices were not motivated by financial rewards, status, or recognition, but by an unwavering commitment to the child's safety and happiness. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, absorbing each word as if it were a ray of light piercing the darkness of disbelief. The billionaire, his eyes brimming with tears, finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. He declared in a firm but emotionally charged voice that he recognized the truth. Not only was the maid trustworthy, but she was also the only one capable of offering his son the love and stability that he, despite all his power and money, had failed to provide. He admitted his mistakes, not as a boss, but as a man, as a father. The weight of pride and vanity dissolved before the honesty of the situation, and a feeling of gratitude and respect began to fill the room. The climax reached its peak when the maid, in turn, admitted her own vulnerabilities and fears. She shared how much she feared losing her bond with the boy, the billionaire's trust, and the stability she had finally found. Every word carried sincerity, every pause allowing the intensity of emotion to spread throughout the room. The family members, previously skeptical and reserved, began to realize they were facing something much greater than mere work relationships or social hierarchies. They were witnessing the essence of humanity, the capacity to forgive, to trust, and to recognize the true value of love and dedication. At the end of his account, there was a moment of absolute silence, followed by discreet applause and understanding looks. The billionaire hugged his maid in front of everyone, a simple gesture yet loaded with meaning. He publicly acknowledged that, although the world might judge his past, decisions, in that moment, emotional justice and integrity prevailed over all other parameters. The child finally ran to the maid, embracing her with genuine joy. His eyes reflected pure happiness, unfiltered, unreserved, only true love. For him, the world was complete in that moment, and the narrative that had just unfolded transformed into lessons that would transcend any material wealth or social influence. As everyone digested the events, the maid and the billionaire understood that their future depended on conscious choices. They decided to work together to ensure not only the child's well-being, but also that truth, ethics, and love would continue to guide every decision from then on. The shocking secret that once held the potential for destruction had now become a catalyst for redemption, trust, and hope. And you, what would you do if you were in the billionaire's shoes? Could you put pride aside, recognize human worth above wealth and power, and allow truth and love to guide your decisions? Leave your comment below, share your opinion, and subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories full of drama, suspense, and shocking revelations, because these lessons carry more weight than any fortune in the world.